So for my visual presentation, I wanted to explore some of the visuals and some of the data that I found during research and provide a little bit of context for my topic, which is prison in California, obviously. And I think the visuals I found they're pretty much really enhanced with the context that I found, and I think they show the patterns and issues with our prison system pretty well. So first, I want to go over some key terms, just so you'll understand what's happening later in the presentation. So recidivism is a conviction of a second crime and serving of a second sentence after a release from prison for a previous crime. Jail is an institution owned by a city or county, typically counties in California, which individuals convicted of misdemeanors or who are awaiting trial are held. A prison is a state-owned or privately owned institution which houses individuals convicted of felonies, so they're in prison for a longer period of time. Typically, that's the difference. The three strikes rule was California's Prop 184, which decreed that after 2 felony convictions, any subsequent criminal conviction would be punished by a 25 to life sentence. It's worth noting here that that's any conviction, which could be a misdemeanor or a felony. So the third crime, no matter what it was, would give you 25 to life. And then California Prop 36 was an amendment to Prop 184, which allowed nonviolent drug charges to be ruled as misdemeanors. So that meant somebody who had repeat drug charges wouldn't be susceptible to the 3 strikes rule. And it was a way to kind of decrease the severity of California's justice system. And the last is tough on crime, which was Reagan's pretty infamous stance to reform the U.S. justice system, which has still had impact on how we approach justice in the U.S. today. So why does prison overpopulation matter? So prison labor is a huge method of production in the United States, and prisoners were recruited as firefighters for years. This is pretty well known now because during this year's pretty serious wildfires, this issue came to light because we didn't really have any other help for the fires, and everyone who was in prison was sick with the coronavirus. So it did kind of come to light this year, and after public pressure, Gavin Newsom, our governor, did pass a measure that allows them to become firefighters upon release. Before this year, anyone who was, so any former inmate who was released, they were banned from the profession no matter how long they'd been doing it in prison. Typically the jobs for prison labor are the ones no one else wants to do. So that could be food production or produce harvesting, working on oil and gas pipe maintenance in southern states especially, like Louisiana and Alabama. And those jobs particularly are very dangerous, and it makes the fact that their wages are so low a little bit more horrifying. In California, a wage for somebody, an inmate who is working, is between 30 and 95 cents an hour before deductions that the prison is allowed to make. The use of prison labor is allowed under the 13th Amendment because it banned unpaid or below minimum wage paying jobs as a punishment for a crime. So the use of prison labor is also involuntary typically. Sometimes it's painted as a way for inmates to build up work experience, so when they're released, it's less likely they're going to commit more crimes. But a refusal to do prison labor when you're an inmate can be punished with solitary confinement, so it's less voluntary than is often portrayed as. So here's our first visual, and it's just a little simple infographic of how many California residents are locked up and where. So here we can see the majority of them are in state prisons, and the second largest population is in local jails. Youth and federal population is a lot smaller. It's worth noting that youth data is extremely hard to find because it's under lockdown, obviously, because it deals with minors, and a lot of that data is only available upon special request from the California Department of Corrections. California's prison and jail incarceration rates. This is a really useful graph because it kind of shows the historical impact of a couple different prison reform measures. So here we see the really steady increase from the 80s, so right when Reagan got into office, a sharp
increase in jail incarceration right in those last years of the Reagan era, or the Reagan administration, I guess. But we can see they're growing pretty closely in tandem with each other. Because more people are being arrested, so more people are in jail awaiting trial, and more people are being sent to prison. Right around here, right around 1994, which is when the 3 strikes rule, or Prop 184 was passed, there's a sharp drop kick-started in jail incarceration rate. And that's because more and more people are being sent to prison for felonies that weren't previously felonies, or they're being sent to prison on their third strike. So the jail incarceration rate is dropping severely because all those people are being sent to prison. As we can see, the prison incarceration rate keeps growing after the jail incarceration rate drops. So I think that's very interesting. And then you can kind of see here, right around 2011, there was something known as the realignment, which I'll get a little bit more into later, but just note that the prison incarceration rate drops pretty sharply, and we see a spike in the jail incarceration rate. So I really like this infographic because it kind of shows, it's very isolated. I like that we can just track the success of California prison reform relative to the state itself. So I drew this little line here to show how all of this like growth and then the sudden drop, it's only bringing us back to the prison population level that was where we were at in 1994. One of the reasons that California has been so worried about addressing overpopulation and the realignment in 2011 right here. So the realignment was caused as a way to lower the state prison population as a result of California basically being ordered by the Supreme Court that they have to lower their prison population because it was a health risk. It was ruled as a type of cruel and unusual punishment because the prisons were so overpopulated that there were a lot of physical and mental health concerns for the inmates. But all of these measures that we took, so starting specifically around 2011 and in the past decade, only really brought us back to the era of the three strikes rule. So we still had prison overpopulation back before the three strikes rule. So and this chart doesn't really acknowledge that all these people did not leave the prisons. They didn't leave the prison system, they just left the prisons. Most of these people ended up going to local jails, or they ended up going to California's few privately owned prisons. We mostly have state-owned prisons, but we do have a few privately owned prisons which were not counted in the Supreme Court's order. And then this is the data analysis that I did for my project. Basically, I just did a little linear regression plot because I wanted to see how much correlation there was between the US institutional incarcerated population and the California institutional incarcerated population. And I ended up finding that there is a decent positive correlation. Right down here we can see there's less correlation, but in recent years it's tightened up pretty much. Which kind of goes to show that California's prison reform actually has had us more on track with the U.S. institutional population, which doesn't so much make us a leader of the pack in prison reform, as it does show that we're just kind of catching up with the rest of the country, because we are one of the most populous states in the nation, so we do have a lot more people, but unfortunately, I don't think that means we need to have the most people in prison, to be quite honest. So that was my presentation. I hope this helps you introduce you to my topic, and I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching.